It's 2 in the morning. You're alone in a new city, trying to sleep in an unfamiliar bed, when your phone's glare cuts through the dark. You have an unread message from an unknown number reading, "Why are you in my room?" In 2022, a student named Saqib found himself in this exact position in a dense Dhaka neighborhood. He had recently moved into the New Life student mess. Despite the name, the building was a relic of damp concrete and keeling paint, where a heavy, unnatural silence settled over the hallways as soon as the sun went down. Saqib was a typical freshman, navigating his first week away from home. He had been assigned to the 3rd floor, dragging his luggage into room 307. When he asked the hostel manager if the room had been occupied recently, the man's eyes darted toward the stairs. He hesitated for a long second before answering. "Yes, but it's empty now." Saqib, preoccupied with his bags, didn't notice the man's hand trembling as he handed over the key. Moving into a transient space like a cheap student hostel involves a certain risk. You aren't just renting 4 walls. You are stepping into the history of everyone who occupied that bed before you. The haunting of room 307 began as a series of tests. On the first night, at exactly 2 a.m., 3 sharp knocks hit Saqib's door. He opened it to find a corridor that was completely empty and silent. By the second night, the entity moved into his line of sight. While Saqib stood in front of his mirror, he caught a movement behind him. He spun around to an empty room, but when he looked back at the glass, a distinct dark shadow was standing directly over his shoulder. On the third night, the presence became physical. As Saqib lay in the dark, he felt the mattress sink beside him, as if a heavy weight had just sat down. A freezing exhale hit his ear, followed by a localized whisper, "This room is mine." These 3 nights followed a clear ladder of escalation. The entity moved from the hallway to the mirror to the bed, systematically claiming every inch of the room until Saqib had nowhere left to retreat. Desperate for an explanation, Saqib spoke to the older students in the neighboring rooms. They told him about Rifat, the boy who had lived in 307 before him. Rifat had died in that room, and in the weeks leading up to his death, his neighbors often heard him shouting at the walls, arguing with a voice they couldn't hear. Saqib began searching the room for anything Rifat might have left behind. Tucked far beneath the bed frame, he found a weathered, leather-bound diary. The entries described a rapid descent into terror. Rifat wrote about a face watching him from the mirror, and a voice that refused to let him leave. The final entry was written in a frantic, shaky hand. "Today," he said, "I will stay. You leave." The diary acted as a roadmap for what he could see his own experiences reflected in Rifat's notes, each page confirming that he was being forced into the same role the previous tenant had played. To see why a story like this takes hold, you have to look at the environment. In the older, densely packed neighborhoods of Dhaka, like Farmgate or Bakshi Bazaar, millions of people navigate narrow streets and towering concrete blocks. The scale of the city is immense. But for a student arriving from a small town, that density creates a paradox. They are surrounded by people, yet disconnected from everyone they know. They are navigating a massive urban maze entirely on their own for the very first time. In that silence, the mind can become its own worst enemy. The weight of the city and the isolation of a dark hostel room create a space where urban legends and personal anxieties can manifest as physical terror. A room like 307 doesn't just provide a setting for a ghost story. It feeds on the vulnerability of the people who have no one else to turn to. Saqib decided to leave that night, but as he reached for his bag, the door slammed shut. The lock clicked on its own. The overhead light died, and his phone's signal vanished, leaving him in total darkness. 2 pure white eyes opened in the corner of the room. They didn't blink. They simply drifted closer through the blackness, staring at him. The mirror across the room suddenly pulsed with a dim light. Saqib saw Rifat's pale, smiling face looking back at him. As Saqib watched, his own reflection began to change. His skin turned gray, and his own eyes began to fade into that same milky white. He could feel the warmth leaving his body as he struggled to breathe. Saqib threw himself against the door, kicking the wood until his legs bruised. He didn't stop until the lock finally splintered, and he tumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air as he ran for the stairs. He never went back for his things. He escaped the room, but he did so only by physically breaking the barrier before the change in the mirror became permanent. Saqib eventually heard the rest of Rifat's warning. The legend says that anyone who enters room 307 is never quite the same. They carry a piece of that cold, dark silence with them long after they leave the building. Room 307 remains empty today, held shut by a heavy padlock. But the students who live on either side still hear the knocks at 2 a.m., and new residents in the building still find anonymous messages on their phones, asking why they've come to the hostel. The story of room 307 is a reminder of what happens when the isolation of a new city becomes too heavy to bear. It is the moment where the silence of the room finally starts to speak. Navigating an unfamiliar world requires more than just a map. It requires the mental strength to stand your ground when the environment tries to claim you as its own.